and welcome to this little series of videos on getting to grips with jazz guitar chord shapes. The idea is to help you build up a solid basis for your repertoire of shapes by starting with something we call shell voicings, just bare bones shapes. And then we'll be layering these shell voicings with extensions and some simple variations so they're good for major and minor chords. Now, in this first session, we'll use them to create straightforward dominant chords. Then, in the second video, we'll tweak these shapes to create minor seventh chords and major seventh chords too. And next we'll be adding diatonic extensions, meaning we'll have additional notes from the key that we're in on the upper strings. Then we'll see what happens if we add the fourth of the scale and the sixth of the scale to our shell voicings. And following on from that, we'll look at altered extensions, things like sharp nines and sharp 11s, all that kind of stuff. And finally, we'll move on to some practical applications that come from these ideas, including some common chord substitutions that you'll find really useful. And we'll get into the concept of rootless voicings. By the end of this series, you'll have a good idea of what goes into constructing the various chord types. You should be able to find at least one sensible position for any common jazz chord shape, and you'll hopefully have a better understanding of the relationships between different notes on the guitar neck too. Okay, to start with, let's look at these dominant chords, which are basic seventh chords. And we're going to play two very simple shapes. One is based on the sixth string, and the other is based on the fifth string. Let's look at the way a simple C7 chord is constructed. Of course, there's a C in the bass, then the third, E, then G, the fifth, and the flat 7 is B flat. And these four notes make a C7. In fact, the G, the fifth of the chord, doesn't really add anything to the function or flavour of the chord, but the third and 7 do. That's E and B flat. They create the so-called tritone. That's a pair of notes that are half an octave apart, and this is what provides the tension in a dominant chord. So, a dominant chord could be reduced to just three notes, the bass note C, and then the tritone pair of notes above, that's the third and the 7. If you're not up to speed on dominant chords, then take a look at my video on chords with sevenths, and that should help clear things up. So, on the guitar, this basic dominant chord with just three notes can be played like this. For C7 with the bass note on the fifth string at the third fret and the tritone pair above, or else like this with the C on the sixth string at the eighth fret and again the tritone pair above. And in both shapes, notice that that tritone pair is on the third and fourth strings. Take a second to get to grips with these two shapes. These are the shell voicings, and everything we do from here is based on these two shapes. Notice there are still two lovely open strings above our shapes that we're not using yet. We'll be adding to them in a while when we extend the chords with additional notes. For now, though, try playing around the circle of fifths using just these shapes. In this sequence, each chord leads logically to the next one in an unending cycle. So, if you're not familiar with the circle of fifths, I have a video on that which would be useful to watch first. By the way, in the States, I know the circle of fifths is referred to as the cycle of fourths, and I think you guys draw it the other way around. But in case you're wondering, the circle of fifths and the cycle of fourths are the same thing. For reference, let's take a moment to look at the way the roots of these chords map out on the guitar neck if we go around the circle of fifths. This zigzag pattern shows you the root in each case, starting on D on the sixth string, on the 10th fret, then moving to G on the 5th string, same fret. Then moving down and repeating with C on the 6th string, 8th fret, F on the 5th string, 8th fret, and so on. And if you can visualize this, it'll really help you to keep your place. So you're alternating between the two shell voicings and letting the roots follow this sawtooth pattern. So let's give it a go. We'll start with D7, up on the 10th fret on the 6th string, then on to G7, up here on the 5th string at the 10th fret, now to C7 on the 8th fret of the 6th string, then it's F7 back on the 5th string at the 8th fret, moving to B flat 7 on the 6th string, 6th fret, E flat 7 on the 5th string, 6th fret. Can you see what's happening here? We're alternating between the two shapes and moving down 2 frets for each pair. Now, even if the music you're playing doesn't move around the circle of fifths like this, there are bound to be sections of it that do. Think of things like a 2-5-1 in jazz, for example, or even just moving from a chord 1 to a chord 4 in the blues, and you're already playing a part of this sequence. So it's incredibly useful to have it under your fingers. Okay, once more, starting up at D7, and we'll go around the neck as far as we can this time. D7, and G7, C7, F7, B flat 7, E flat 7, A flat 7, D flat 7, G flat, or we could call that F sharp 7, and B7 before we run out of room on the neck. These two shapes then can be used up and down the neck, and of course you can start as high as you like before starting your circle of fifths sequence. And one more thing, do you notice that as you go around the sequence, the pair of notes on the middle 2 strings, that tritone pair, descends 1 fret at a time. Having these two equivalent shapes, one on the 6th string and one on the 5th string, means that you're never far from an appropriate shape. It helps to create a smooth flow to your movement. At this point then, we have the bottom 2 strings for the root of the chord, the middle 2 strings for that tritone, the active ingredient, if you like, that gives the chord its character, and then we'll have the top 2 strings free for us to add any extensions or alterations. In the next video, we're going to adapt these shapes for different types of chords, but for now I've made a jam track that goes around the circle of fifths, which is ideal for practicing these shapes. I'll put a link in the description, but we can play a snippet of it here. It starts on G7 and stays on each chord for 8 bars before moving to the next one. Remember that sawtooth pattern I showed you just now? Keep that in mind, and that should help you follow the sequence all the way.